Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the thick of it, looking at some critical global developments straight out of that NATO summit in The Hague.
Yeah, we've got a lot to unpack. We've pulled together direct reports, some expert takes, and even insights from an exclusive interview right there at the summit.
Exactly. And our goal, as always, is to cut through all the noise. We want to give you the key takeaways, maybe some surprising facts, so you can really grasp what was actually at stake for global security.
Right. We'll be looking at defense spending, those, subtle shifts happening in alliances, and how these evolving threats are changing what security even means.
And let's start right there, actually, with those evolving threats and the immediate sort of geopolitical heat they generate.
A perfect example just landed during the summit itself.
Indeed. Some breaking news, really, from the U.S. perspective there. President Trump forcefully pushing back against a leaked U.S. intelligence report.
Yeah, a report that apparently questioned just how successful those recent American strikes on Iran actually were.
And it wasn't just a denial. What stood out were his incredibly vivid descriptions of the damage. He was adamant Iran's nuclear program was set back decades. He used terms like virtual obliteration.
He really did. Painted quite a picture, didn't he? Everything above is burned black, trees, ground just gone. He even mentioned one building seemed to have sort of sunk into the granite bedrock, vaporized, basically.
And he stressed the speed, claiming he was so fast they couldn't have removed any sensitive materials.
Yeah.
But, for our audience, how much stock can we really put in one side's description, especially with intelligence matters like these?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's exactly why independent verification is so absolutely vital, which brings us to the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog.
Right. What was their take?
Well, Guy, who heads the IAEA, he immediately said they were already talking to the Iranian regime, trying to arrange inspections as soon as possible. He even mentioned getting a letter from Iran's foreign minister about, quote, protective measures.
Protective measures. So, despite President Trump's definitive language about obliteration, the IAEA is saying, hold on, we need to see for ourselves.
Precisely. Yanni basically said, look, we acknowledge the military action until yesterday, but an evaluation on the ground is essential. They need to confirm what the actual situation is.
It just really underscores that gap, doesn't it?
Right.
Between powerful rhetoric and, verifiable reality in international security.
Yeah.
Need eyes on the ground.
Exactly. And, this whole immediate crisis over verification, it connects directly to the bigger picture NATO was wrestling with in The Hague.
How so?
Because while this was unfolding, the core debate inside the summit was about, what is real security in today's world? A world changing so rapidly.
That's a great transition. Because Secretary General Mark Rutte, when he officially opened things, he didn't exactly sugarcoat it. He called it a dangerous moment for the billion citizens living in NATO countries.
No, he was very direct. He listed the challenges, Russia's war in Ukraine, this assertive grouping of adversaries challenging the current order, the war in the Middle East, terrorism still being a threat, and then all these new technologies complicating everything.
Quite the list. So what was the alliance's response? What were the stated goals?
Rutte talked about making historic, transformational decisions. The aim, make NATO stronger, fairer, and, reportedly, more lethal.
More lethal. That's strong wording.
It is. It's not just about having more tanks or planes. It's about being more effective, more decisive when it comes to collective defense. And underpinning all of it, that absolute bedrock commitment. Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all.
And to make good on stronger and more lethal, there's that really concrete and frankly ambitious plan. All allies spending 5% of their GDP on defense.
Yeah, 5%. And that includes not just core military stuff, but also broader security investments. For a lot of countries, that is a huge leap.
A huge leap. And achieving that politically must be like walking a tightrope. Especially thinking about, say, the Baltic states.
Oh, absolutely. Countries like Estonia, they were genuinely worried that, all the focus on the Middle East might sort of push the European security situation, especially the threat from Russia right next door, into the background.
You can understand that anxiety. We actually heard from Estonia's Prime Minister, Kaja Kallas, right after the North Atlantic Council meeting. How did she describe the mood?
She said the dynamic was excellent. She really emphasized the unity, the willingness across the board to step up and contribute more.
Did she feel those eastern flank concerns were heard? What about that 5% target itself?
Her view was yes, the unity held on the 5% commitment. She acknowledged Spain, for example, had a different view on the specific number, but crucially it didn't block the overall agreement. That consensus was reached.
That's significant, and Estonia itself is, well, quite the example, isn't it? Given where they sit geographically.
Definitely. They're right there, bordering Russia. So their defense spending is already high, projected to hit 5.4% of GDP next year. That's even above the new target. It just shows the level of commitment when the threat feels, well, existential.
5.4%. And like she pointed out, that doesn't come easy. It means tough choices back home, right?
Yeah.
Cutting public services, maybe raising taxes.
Exactly. Those are deeply unpopular moves in any democracy. But what it tells you is the perceived urgency. For many allies now, freedom and the security to maintain it has a very real and increasing cost attached. It's seen as a necessary investment.
It's a direct investment in sovereignty, you could say.
Precisely. And in collective deterrence.
And that idea of shared burden, shared security, it obviously extends to Ukraine. Was there concern Ukraine might get less focus with everything else going on?
There absolutely was that concern beforehand, but the messaging from the summit was very clear. Prime Minister Kallas stressed Ukraine was absolutely on the agenda. President Zelensky and his team were there, very visible at the dinner discussions.
So their voice was definitely heard.
Yes. And NATO allies doubled down on their commitment, backing Ukraine as long as needed to reach a just and lasting peace. That long-term strategic support was really reaffirmed.
Okay, and speaking of strategic posture and maybe past uncertainties, there have been questions swirling around Donald Trump's commitment to Article 5, especially worrying for those eastern flank countries. Any clarity on that?
That was actually a pretty critical moment, according to reports from inside the room. President Trump apparently stated directly in the meeting that he is committed to Article 5 and to NATO as long as he is president.
Really? He said that inside the meeting?
Yes. And for countries like Estonia, who have US, UK, French troops on their soil as part of that forward defense, hearing that directly was described as hugely reassuring. It offered a level of strategic certainty that perhaps felt a bit shaky before.
Wow. Okay. That's a significant piece of reassurance. So you have that commitment plus Europe stepping up its own defense spending.
Yeah.
It paints a picture of an evolving transatlantic relationship.
It really does. It seems to be settling into a model where Europe invests more significantly in its own defense, becoming that free and prosperous area, capable of managing more on its own, while still acknowledging that those transatlantic ties, those security guarantees, remain absolutely essential.
It's a recalibration.
A recalibration, yes. Which leads us to another major theme, how the very nature of warfare, of security threats, is changing.
Right. It's not just about boots on the ground anymore.
Not at all. We're deep into the era of hybrid threats. The key insight here is, tanks and jets are visible, but the invisible battlefronts, cyber warfare, disinformation campaigns, they're becoming equally, maybe even more powerful.
It forces a whole rethink of national defense, doesn't it? Less about physical borders, more about networks.
Completely. And Estonia, again, is right at the forefront here, particularly on cybersecurity. For them, this isn't some abstract future threat. It's been the reality for years.
Since 2007, right? They've faced constant Russian cyber attacks.
Constant attacks since 2007, and they've only ramped up since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It really sharpens the focus when it's happening to you day in, day out.
And Estonia is so digitized. I remember reading, 100% of public services are online?
Pretty much everything. You mentioned marriage and divorce, maybe not the most romantic example, like you said, but it just shows how deeply embedded digital life is in their society. Voting, taxes, healthcare, it's all online.
Which must make them incredibly vulnerable if everything relies on those digital systems. How on earth do they defend against that constant barrage?
Well, their whole approach is built on sort of relentless vigilance. They talk about good digital hygiene, both for citizens and the state. But crucially, they have incredibly strong links between the public sector and their very robust private IT sector. They work together constantly.
Public-private partnership for cyber defense, essentially.
Exactly, hand in glove. But it's a battle that never stops evolving. We're seeing AI being used more and more in these hybrid attacks now.
AI. Of course. That complicates things even further.
Immensely. AI is amplifying both the attacks and the defenses. So you have to constantly adapt, constantly innovate just to keep pace. And Estonia is very open about sharing what they learn, their experiences, with other NATO allies. They see it as a collective fight.
Because a vulnerability anywhere in the alliance is a potential weakness for everyone.
Precisely. It requires collective solutions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's really worth taking a moment thinking about how all these pieces fit together. These strategic shifts, the big money commitments on defense, the rapid tech changes. They're genuinely redefining what global security means for all of us. It's not just summit talk. It impacts the world you navigate every day.
Yeah, and maybe a final thought to leave you with. In a world where, as we've discussed, a digital attack can be just as devastating as a physical one, where those lines between peace and conflict get blurrier all the time, what does real security, national and international, actually demand from us? Beyond just the traditional military stuff, what else is needed in the years ahead?
That's a powerful question. What does security demand beyond military might? Something for all of us to think about.